And maybe I don't think you'll fall for that parlor game, but I'll tell you what. Since John's represented here by two young men and they're videotaping every word I'm saying, let's offer a concession in the spirit of friendly campaigning. Let's just go ahead for the sake of argument and say that charge in the mailer you received was true. It offers us a unique opportunity to talk about the curiosity of Washington, D.C. math. Because just stop and think. John has sent you mailers attacking me for an alleged spending record over 12 years' time, when with one vote, he more than doubled it. Only in Washington, D.C., and only, I guess, with millions upon millions of dollars to spend. Which brings up another interesting departure point, doesn't it? Wasn't it our senior senator who went to the well of the United States Senate to fight for so-called campaign finance reform? Wasn't it our United States senator who said, and I quote, "These contributions corrupt us all"? Well, he seems to have gotten over that in the New York nanosecond. Yeah. So, that's just another interesting departure, but it's kind of part of the curiosity that goes on in Washington, D.C. So B is for the bailouts. C could be for campaign finance reform, but I think even more troubling is cap and trade. Remember, it was our senior senator who teamed with Joe Lieberman in the last Congress to author the cap and trade legislation. In fact, my opponent at a press conference announcing the bill said, and I quote, "I don't see how you can be a conservative and oppose cap and trade." Oh, really, John? I sure do. Because cap and trade is an impractical solution to a non-existent problem. Global warming is a hoax. And cap and trade, all it would do would be to raise energy costs on American families, raise taxes on American families, and lower our standard of living. There is nothing conservative. There is nothing to recommend that type of legislation. And yet my opponent was the author of that ill-advised piece of legislation in the last Congress. D is for your dollars, your dollars in your pocket. A few years ago, they used to be tax dollars. But you were so wonderful to me. You gave me the opportunity, at least in the configuration of districts for 3 of my 6 terms in Washington, I was honored to represent you here in Tempe, and also honored to serve on the Ways and Means Committee. Thus far, the only Arizonan to serve on that committee. And Ways and Means is important because, as you know from the Constitution, all revenue bills, that is to say, all bills dealing with taxation, must originate in the House. So I had the chance to author, to help write the so-called Bush tax cuts of 2001 and 2003. You may recall that my opponent voted no on both those tax cut measures. Tax cuts that reinvigorated our economy. Tax cuts that by 2007 in Arizona had led to an unemployment rate just a little over 4%. My opponent not only voted no on the tax cuts, but on both occasions, he called them, and I quote, tax cuts for the rich, sounding a lot more like John Kerry than the John McCain we used to know. There is much to be admired, seriously speaking, and I'm saying this in the pauses because it is a little tough to keep down some of the frustration, but a lot of people have been praying for us, and I got to tell you, the attacks haven't bothered me. In fact, they've just helped me rededicate the intensity to this campaign. And despite all that, despite the name calling the other night where my opponent got upset and called me a pig, despite, I don't know which of you guys dresses up in the pink pig suit and comes to certain things. That's okay. We understand. Sophomoric behavior has its place in campaigns, but should that sophomoric behavior be proffered by one who wants to be regarded as a senior statesman. You know, the sad fact is that our senior senator, who should be a statesman, has just basically become a political shapeshifter. And he thinks you can be fooled. So I guess we're going to find out this year. Is 2010 going to be a different year?
Yes.
Will we see the rise of the grassroots?
Yes.
Yes.
Or will we see the Washington money come back in and buy an election on our home turf?
No way.
It's up to you, and so are your questions right now. So let me open the floor. Could I do that now, Gary?
Yes.
Great. And who's got a question? Yes, ma'am. Miss Ann.
I worked on John McCain's campaign, and I kept saying, talk about George Soros. And his Washington, D.C. staff told me we can't talk about that because he was funded by Soros in 2000 and 2001.
Oh.
And that's Move On Oregon Tide and all the people that funded Obama. Okay. Are you controlled by George Soros?
No, I'm not. In fact, when I found out, true story, there are a couple of I hate to put you through this, but this is what I understand. I heard through the grapevine. You know the Mastro's Steakhouse up north, and I guess they have the Ocean Club and another, maybe City Hall is part of that family. Soros was part of the investment group that bought those places, so he quit going there to eat. I was out buying books one day with John Micah, and the lady who was the hostess of the Ocean Club said, Congressman, we don't see you here anymore. I said, yeah, well, George Soros bought your restaurant. And her husband went, see, I told you he'd find out about that. That's why it's not there. Yeah. Yeah, Clinton's lady, Soros financed, as far as we know, the wedding cake and probably a whole lot more. Yeah, there was another reason. As I understand it, the so-called Reform Institute, I believe a couple of the senior McCain staffers, in fact, it may have been, and let me couch this because, as you know, there are those pickers of nit who assiduously review everything I say to put out press releases about some sort of alleged lack of intellectual acuity on my part. So I want to make sure I step very carefully. As I understand it, and I'm always open to correction, Rick Davis, Mr. McCain's campaign manager in the presidential cycle, I believe, received some sort of financial stipend from the so-called Reform Institute and a few other senior McCain staffers. Of course, for Rick, that was small money. His bigger clients are in Russia and Saudi Arabia and places like that. Oh, but you know, that's the other funny thing. I'm supposed to be a Washington insider and lobbyist. You know, it would be that funny if they weren't so cynical. The guy running McCain's campaign down here has been through that revolving door. He's been staff director for McCain's campaign as chief of staff, and then he's been a lobbyist. In fact, according to reports, he received a fee of $422,000 from the troubled federal housing agency, Freddie Mac. The stuff would be funny if it weren't so cynical and serious. But you just have to love the audacity saying, look, we got millions of dollars, so we'll call JD a Washington insider and lobbyist. It's a curious world.